The year is 1948. Lumberjack, bartender, musician, and man of the Northwoods, Fred Smith at the age of 62 has just created his first sculpture of concrete. For the next 15 years, Fred Smith will continue to erect hundreds of monuments, working dawn to dusk, until he is no longer physically able. An environment composed from a lifetime of memories, history, and legends built to remain in the surrounding nature from which said history was written. A self-taught artist with no formal training, Fred Smith created his vision as a gift for all the American people, not selling a single piece. Using the materials at hand, Fred Smith constructed his monuments of concrete and embellished them with bits of glass and junkyard parts. In spite of the harsh criticism from his family and those around him, Fred Smith completely dedicated his remaining years to bringing his ideas to life, and once confined to a wheelchair, spent his days and nights dreaming of the remaining possibilities he was unable to complete. A collection of bygone times for anybody and anyone to enjoy, and a bold reminder that we are all capable of creativity, no matter the obstacles that hold us back.
You can go for a walk. I thought maybe I wouldn't put my hat on, but it's too cold not to have my hat on. I moved to Wisconsin when I was 18, when I went to college. I had grown up in Florida, so I had never even seen snow before. Moved to Phillips in 1964. I love the woods and the streams and that kind of thing. I like the rural area, and I like learning of the people and the different cultures that are here. I really became enthralled with the area. My first experiences was like many other people have, driving by on the road and saying, "What's that?"
Tried to get my father to stop, but there wasn't, any way of that ever happening. And then, maybe a year or two after that, I said, "Well, Dad, would just slow down." "All right, I'll slow down, but I've got to get back to Chicago." And he was out working on stuff.
My next door neighbor and I recently graduated from high school and decided we wanted to go fishing in northern Wisconsin. We took his father's old Dodge and drove up to the Willow Flowage and fished there. And then we went up to the Flambeau Flowage, and in doing so passed through Phillips. And that's when I saw the park for the first time.
Later, when I had Cub Scouts, I was looking for some place that gave the history of the area. And that's when I visited in earnest to learn what Fred Smith had put forth that represented the history.
I was either 19 or 20, something like that, and I thought, well, I'm going to see what that was, what was happening up there. It looked very interesting. Fred was still there. He wasn't moving very much, and actually I met him in the bar. He had the bar open. We sat in there and talked for a while, and then he said, well, something like, "Would you like me to show you around?" I said, well, maybe one or two things that would be nice. I'd like to hear what you have to say about them. And so we kind of went around to the side of the bar and walked, kind of into the woods. And here was Sacagawea. I just instinctively knew who it was supposed to be before he even said anything. But it was fairly densely wooded. Then he had cleared this spot and he had built a mound, like an Indian mound. And then he placed his statue of her on top of it. And I couldn't believe it.
I never officially met him. He was sitting on the porch when I took a group of Cub Scouts there, and he was observing what we were doing. I put a token donation in his "donations are appreciated" box. He came down and just kind of looked at me and then wanted to see what I had put in the box.
I spent so many years working on sculptures, many of Fred Smith's sculptures, and got to know Fred Smith's work really well in terms of its physical construction, not just its incredible imaginative and aesthetic beauty. He was a really practical builder, and he also had to do a lot of work in a short period of time. But basically, he had a formula, and it was a really good formula.
He made things out of all his found materials and things that were around him. He was a farmer, so he had baling wire. He raised mink, so he had mink wire. He raised ginseng, so he had wood. He was a logger. He used the woods. The other thing that he did is he had a tavern, and the tavern provided all kinds of glass. The brown glass you see was part of the Rhinelander beer bottles that he sold beer. So that was unique. He also visited the junkyards and found parts of old cars and utilized all that.
The overall glass embedment and the use of glass to create this decorative system was also just beautiful. I mean, he was able to take and break glass, logically understand how to make a vest on an Indian's profile of a chief, and do it in a way that, you just had to look 2 and 3 times to understand that there was a lot of thought gone into that process. And, it may have been done quick, and it may have been done over a wooden system, but when it came down to the finishing systems, he tried to dress it out to the nines, and he did.
There are essentially male figures that wear pants and female figures that wear long dresses, and then all manner of animals, and then other kinds of sculptures that represent ordinary, regular working people who he honored and respected and who aren't normally depicted in public monuments. And then there are, Abraham Lincoln and Sun Yat-sen and Ben-Hur and an angel and other kinds of important people who are generally larger and elevated off the ground. Smith didn't do them realistically in the way that we think of realistic portraiture, and he had a kind of almost a cubist approach to it. He's like, bam, bam, maybe the ear's up here, maybe it's down here. It didn't matter. They still come through as, I think, some of the most original and brilliant portraiture of his time, while some people think they are, kind of clunky or, unschooled. They're really powerful. And they are so much a part of the place. I think something that's so important about Fred Smith's work is that it's a spatial narrative of life in Phillips and his experiences there, local, regional, national, and international history, and yet the local part is so strong. It's interesting to think about how Fred's life led to him becoming just a fully engaged artist in his senior years. Hands down, I don't doubt that he became observant, when he started making art. He could see things, I'm sure, for his whole life. And it was also from a generation where you had to, you're out in the woods, you have to know what you're looking at. You have to know where the animals are. A combination of really hard work. Just really hard work. If you just look at any vintage photographs of lumber camps and the wagons piled high with more lumber than you think 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 horses or oxen could possibly even pull on an ice-covered, snow-covered, freezing road, and doing everything by hand. So he put the real tools that were used there. He showed the lumberjacks. He showed the ice wagon. Fred just showed who did the work and how it was done. People and animals. And Fred Smith wanted that to be known.
To a lot of people who visit the park, everything looks the same to them. But they're all different personalities, and they're all different. Sometimes he would spend hours talking about what I would consider the most insignificant, thing in the park. Could be a dog, one of the concrete dogs or something, and then he would have this enormous repertoire of memories, because it wasn't just a dog. These were personalities of animals that he had owned.
He was talking about people he grew up and knew, and that's how he interpreted them. So aesthetically, he did a great job. The personalities of some of these people, I was then, would learn secondhand about this person was very critical or this person had a bad temper. And you could actually see, I could see it in the work of the sculptures that he created. I think that he struggled, though, also that the community didn't understand. A lot of the community found him to be a little eccentric and didn't understand the nature of that work, and that they didn't quite respect it. Because I think they knew him and they grew up with him, and they didn't quite respect him because he had no formal education, but he had what I would say street smarts. He knew how things got done, and he knew how to get them done. And so the stuff wouldn't be there if it wouldn't have been about his tenacity as a human being.
He didn't have the support of his family, which is understandable. He was doing something that could have embarrassed them. It's using up all his time. It's taking him away from his family. It's doing something embarrassing on a really grand level right on the highway. And embarrassing because, it's not conventional. A lot of people saw it as just a tremendous waste of money, where money was pretty tight up in those parts.
If you were with Fred, it was sometimes hard to get on to anything else, because if you connected with him, he could, talk for hours, and even though you might be getting to the point where you needed a nap or a break, you couldn't say no. And I just wanted to get over and see this piece. And so then finally, I think he then, said, went into the bar or something. And so I went, really for it. And I guess this is one of the again, for me, important, significant moments in how one really thinks about something. And I thought, well, that's terrific. quite imposing. And then I walked around behind it, and I couldn't believe that he had taken naive. He then infuses the thing with one of the greatest, most ancient symbols of the Tree of Life into a Native American headdress. I can remember this memory as if it happened yesterday. It was just, overwhelming. You just thought, how did he ever, I don't know if he saw it in a magazine but then how he infused that is, I think, one of the most beautiful concepts that I know of in American sculpture. The human figure began to tell me things, make me another person. That sculpture, to have the duality of that piece, but a duality that was so synchronized, was a profound moment for me. I guess I realized then that, he just wasn't some, backwoods kind of guy. I mean, however this happens or however it happened, there's no explaining this, really.
I got involved probably in the 70s when the park became part of Price County.
Now, how does Price County feel about the restoration of Fred Smith's concrete park?
Real interested, Don. Real happy about it, I might say. This has been a part of Price County for a long time. Fred Smith is an old timer, and what he's done here maybe hasn't been appreciated as much as it should have. And now that you're going to restore it, and we can make it part of our county park system, it's going to be, I think that's well received by the county board.
We had done a lot of organization and repaired some minor stuff. A lot of our time was spent organizing these parts and trying to figure out what was happening with the deterioration. And it became obvious that as structural methods of construction were causing things to fall apart. Refooting and putting foundations under some of the existing sculptures in the park was also important because differential settlement was causing them to rise and fall through every frost cycle. Because they weren't structurally tied together earnestly, things would break and shift, and that was definitely a problem. So refooting pieces was underway. We were able to drill out arms and reintroduce metal and weld things back together, and that's what we had started.
When the restoration was almost done, there was a storm.
Everyone in Phillips remembers it. We lost half of our trees around our house, and we spent the summer logging, essentially. I don't think I ventured out much farther than away from my own home at that point. I wasn't involved in the reconstruction of that park until we kind of got our lights on and our water back and reconstructed around our own house. Kohler had just purchased the park, and they went into overdrive trying to put it back together again.
When the storm hit, we had gone back to Sheboygan. We heard about it, called back, and finally got through, and we're told it was a disaster, that everything was down. Jumped in our truck and drove back. I remember going through, the police had cordoned off, you couldn't get into the county, but they knew me, and so we got through, and it was a scene of pure devastation. No power, no light. We went in, we lived in the house. The roof was, parts of it were leaking, but parts of it were fine, so we stayed there. the next morning we just began to look at it objectively and figure out what was happening, and then report back to Sheboygan, because they wanted to know how bad it was. And it was bad. Of the 248 sculptures, 3/4 of them were on the ground. All the trees were down in the park, and there were some very old trees, old pines and an oak. The barn was collapsed. It was knocked pretty much over. So it was a disaster. Every tree in the plantation in the back of the property, which was probably 35 or 40 years old, were all knocked down based on the shear wind system, that cyclonic downburst as it was described later. It came through and put everything down in one specific direction, and it gave it a quarter twist, which ironically then wrecked any of that wood for use because the fibers were so deteriorated you couldn't use them or mill them as lumber. So basically everything had to be cut up for pulp and or burned.
Well, the good part about it was that because some of the statues fell over, you could then find out what was inside these statues. And they found rotten wood, they found rusted metal, and they started discovering ways that they could put things back together that we use to this day.
Gordon Daly was the county board chairman at the time. When I first saw him, he looked at me, he said, "You got a mess on your hands." And I said, "You have a mess on your hands." And basically we both commiserated on the seriousness. The property was insured under umbrella policy through the foundation. And basically the next thing was to start some initial cleanup, which we were doing, and collating and organizing all the parts. It took a long time. It took all the way till the snow flew that fall. We were cleaned off, and all the parts, the broken parts, were organized, and a studio was built, and those parts were hauled into the studio to be worked on in the winter, putting all parts back together and trying to get everything coordinated so in spring we could be working, putting everything back together again.
Things had not been going well in terms of the county, Price County Forestry understanding how to care for 237 life-size and larger-than-life sculptures that they were in charge of.
Not everybody in Price County has the kind of interest that we have for the pieces. Unfortunately, the whole interaction between glass and concrete and the frost heave cycle and the entropic process of pieces in 365, 24/7 in an environment in northern Wisconsin, every year there's that much loss of surface material. And so glass falls off. It's going to happen until there is no glass, and there's not a whole lot you can do about it. There are ways to put it back in. It's very time consuming. And there's never enough budget to do this stuff.
The site absolutely has to be maintained and cared for annually, and it also needs that kind of energy. It just can't be left alone.
Putting anything outside makes it very fragile, and again, that's part of what the experience is with these works. They're not going to maintain themselves forever anywhere, even in your imagination. Maybe they're here today and gone tomorrow, but to have them in real space and real time in the kind of environment that he created them in is really the only way to exhibit work like that.
Your awareness of the wind, the weather, the sunlight, the rain is heightened. I mean, you become more aware of your total environment. It's this experience that you cannot get when you see something in a museum. There's one thing we know for sure is he wanted that work to last forever where it is.
I think anyone who really wants an aesthetic experience, and they really want it, and when I say really want it, I'm saying they need to have a certain kind of experience to make them human, to take them to another level. The Fred Smith Park would be a great place to start, but they'd have to give themselves up to it. It's not easy. Someone like Fred Smith, well, what would he know about proportion and symmetry? And, well, he'd know everything there was to know about it because he lived with it his entire life. The relationship of life to nature, I mean, he knew all of that.
The concept of individual creativity by people who were driven at the age he started, well after working a hard life is extremely important for us and our culture. And there are many, many examples of people like this throughout the United States.
Anything is possible. And if you really want to do something, no matter how complex, no matter how unprepared you might think you are to do it, if you've got an idea, you can do it.
If I had one thing I'd want to say to Fred Smith, the only thing I could say is thank you. Because again, I've had, just great experiences with people and other things, but not the way it was with Fred Smith. I mean, he was like every other kind of person on one hand that you would know, kind of country guy, hard work, and of course you're aware of the fact he was illiterate. He couldn't read or write. And I remember one time mentioning something about that, and he just laughed and he said, "I can't read or write, but he said, I can do things that other people can't do." I knew the end was getting kind of close, so I decided to make a special trip up there because I didn't know if he'd live for another year or, another week or two. And he was in his room, so I went back to his room. I thought maybe he was with someone. He was just sitting in the chair, in his wheelchair, and he saw me as I walked through the door. There was this deer, not this one, but it was a little, plastic deer on his nightstand. And he just picked the thing up and he said, "Pretty soon I'm going over the moon." And I knew then, okay, this is the last time I'm going to see him. And that's exactly what happened.
Pioneers of the Northwoods came from strong stock, hardy and steady, solid as rock. Fred Smith loved them with all of his heart, paid them a tribute, his own concrete part. So they'd be remembered, their ways and their tools, with an artistic wisdom.
I mean, so many people would feel, well, it may be great and wonderful and it's about a particular time, but what's that have to do with me? Well, I guess my answer would be simply that it's time you tried to look inside yourself and find out who you really are.
The soul of the Northwoods he held in his hands. He shaped it in forms we all understand. We'd see America, its life, its times, the art of Fred Smith, Prince of the Pine. Stomp, farmers clearing with oxen and axe, horses and wagons and tough lumberjacks, sawyers and loggers from Phillips right here, and Cheyenne the cowboy drinking Rhinelander beer. Mabel the milker, she's strong and she's lean, her hands are the best milking machine. Fred showed women equal to men in their worth, set them down close, close to the earth.